Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Limited video we have two pieces of news for you. The first is Samsung and their push for 4nm, we'll get into that in just a second, and also an update on the Ryzen Threadripper. Specifically, this comes from a website known as Scrooge. You can think of it almost like PC Parts Picker. So this information was actually sent to us by a viewer, and this is where I attempt to pronounce his name. It is apparently Ionis, and if not, if I have butchered that, he's also asked me to call him John, so I think I've pronounced John at least correctly. But anyway, this information is the specifications of Ryzen Threadripper, and it's really kind of a confirmation of what we already know. Now, allegedly, according to John, if you prefer, he alleges that originally this website, which once again is the equivalent of PC Part Picker, actually was linked to a major retailer in Greece, but obviously that has since been cleansed from the internet. But you can still see a basic synopsis of the specifications of Ryzen Threadripper, excuse me. It is, of course, 1998X, appears to be running at 3500 MHz, whereas the 1998 is running slightly slower at only 3200 MHz. Obviously, this socket in question is SP3R2, and also 16 cores, 32 threads. All of that information is known. It looks, however, like AMD are getting ready to start seeding this to retailers, since this has popped up. This is the only two processors at the moment from the Threadripper lineup which has appeared on this particular website. I will hasten to add, of course, that this is far from confirmation on the final specifications of the processor, and ultimately we're going to have to wait for AMD to confirm this stuff, but this does coincide rather nicely to some previous leaks that we've been through about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago on the channel, so once again that is kind of interesting information. Speaking of interesting information, let's discuss the process of shrinkage, shall we? No, nothing kinky. Get your minds out of the gutters. So, Samsung have detailed that it will start 4nm, I'm just going to repeat that one more time, 4nm risk production by 2020. 7nm is going to hit by 2018. Samsung are, well, pretty much kings of the tech industry when it comes to diversity. Yes, a lot of folks in the, non-IT community might think of them as tablets and smartphones, but of course the reality is much bigger. They produce pretty much everything, and one of the key sources, one of the key revenues, is the manufacturing of various processors. Now, this includes things such as Snapdragons, and currently that is being created on the 10nm process. So, according to Kelvin Lowe, he has said that our roadmap is full of hope and ambition, because Samsung is not just planning these new processors, well, that's a sentence, but at this point in time we can actually really achieve the scheduled plan. He, by the way, is the Senior Director of Marketing. This is information which perhaps is going to shock some of you, because obviously Intel are not so far along. In fact, Intel is lagging behind. They've got 7nm slated for 2020, but you can't, of course, compare process technology to process technology. They are ultimately manufacturing very, very different processors, excuse me. Now, shrinking of processes, for those who don't know, this is a very too long didn't read, and it's certainly not, going to go into all of the details, is wonderful for reduction of battery, improvement rather of battery life. In other words, it drains less energy, more power efficient in data centers, and there are other benefits. Essentially, you're shrinking the size of the transistors on the actual silicon itself. So, in other words, you can fit more of them within the same space, or conversely, have the same level of performance in a smaller space. Now, one of the benefits behind that is you can ultimately put, let's say, more cache on the chip or more processor cores. What it doesn't necessarily do is scale performance linearly. So, for example, if you go from a 28nm to 14nm, you might think to yourself, some folks, anyway, you might not, but some folks might think, well, that allows you to, I don't know, double the clock speed or improve performance, like, double the performance, maximum performance, or whatever. And of course that doesn't actually happen in reality. ultimately, a lot of the massive performance jumps that we had back in the day, you know, when we were on huge processors like, you know, 100 or whatever NM, or even bigger, or, you know, 250 NM. I remember those days. And obviously that's no longer the case. You can't just have massive shifts in process technology, and a lot of this is because ultimately silicon is, well, slowly coming to the end of its shelf life. We've still got a bit of time left in it, and this is obviously the slowdown of Moore's law, and one of the reasons that AMD at the moment are really pushing towards heterogeneous computing, which is of course the act of shifting data to the GPU for processing or the CPU for other types of processing. In other words, the application as well as the system itself will make educated guesses on what workloads will operate best upon different pieces of hardware. And with heterogeneous computing, the purpose of that is ultimately you've got a memory pool which is shared between both devices, or both devices can snoop the other one's memory, and this saves a lot of copying data, which can slow things down, which is the traditional way that, let's say, a PC works, because you've got, let's say, a graphics card, let's for the sake of argument say a GeForce GTX 1080, and you've got, let's say, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory for your, let's say, 7600K or whatever. Obviously, in those cases, data needs to be sent from main system memory to the graphics card memory. With heterogeneous, it doesn't do that. Now, it's very much like the PS4, and yes, it is slightly off topic, but it is just to let you know that, you know, these roadmaps are very exciting and are certainly going to be very beneficial for, let's say, laptops, for, let's say, smartphones, for tablets, and perhaps even for data centers. But ultimately, this stuff is not necessarily going to be the be-all and end-all for processors, for CPUs, and that, of course, is something we have to be cognizant of. But nevertheless, the idea of being able to put more processors, in other words more CPU cores, in the same size of die is definitely going to be beneficial in the long term. With all of that said, thank you very much for the, well, watch. That was possibly the worst sentence I could have possibly used in that situation. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.